March 23, 1945. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, Reims, France. The morning light filters through tall windows as General Dwight D. Eisenhower sits at his desk, a telegram trembling slightly in his hand. The message from Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery is direct, almost demanding. Patton must be relieved, fired, sent home in disgrace. The American general has crossed the Rhine, Germany's last great defensive barrier, in just 36 hours, with minimal preparation, negligible losses, and maximum audacity. Montgomery's meticulously planned operation, involving thousands of paratroopers and months of preparation, is now overshadowed. The British Field Marshal wants justice. Eisenhower exhales slowly, sets the telegram down, and begins composing his response. Words that will define not just this moment, but the entire character of Allied leadership. The Rhine River had stood as Europe's most formidable natural barrier for 2,000 years. Ancient Romans called it the edge of civilization. Medieval kingdoms rose and fell along its banks. Now, in March 1945, it represented something far more immediate. The last line separating the Allied armies from the industrial heart of Nazi Germany. Beyond the Rhine lay the Ruhr Valley, the engine of German war production, and beyond that, Berlin itself. Whoever crossed the Rhine first would claim not just military advantage, but historical immortality. Since the breakout from Normandy in August 1944, Allied forces had swept across France with stunning speed. Paris liberated, the Low Countries freed. By autumn, American, British, and Canadian armies stood along Germany's western frontier, exhausted but triumphant. Then came the shock of the Ardennes, Hitler's desperate winter counteroffensive that Americans would remember as the Battle of the Bulge. For 6 brutal weeks, the Allied advance stalled in blood and snow. German panzers nearly reached the Meuse River before being hurled back at tremendous cost. By February 1945, the Bulge had been erased. The Allies resumed their eastward drive, this time with grim determination. Every German city west of the Rhine fell in succession. Aachen, Cologne, Koblenz. But the river itself remained uncrossed, a wide, fast-flowing moat guarded by destroyed bridges and desperate Wehrmacht divisions. Allied intelligence estimated that a forced crossing would require overwhelming firepower, air superiority, and meticulous planning. It would be bloody, it would be costly, and it would require a commander willing to orchestrate one of history's most complex amphibious operations. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery believed he was precisely that commander. Methodical, cautious, supremely confident in his own judgment. Montgomery had been planning Operation Plunder since January. His vision was characteristically elaborate, a massive set-piece assault involving 2 armies, American and British, supported by the largest airborne drop since D-Day. Thousands of aircraft, artillery bombardments that would shake the earth, engineer battalions ready to throw bridges across the river within hours. Montgomery intended to cross the Rhine with such overwhelming force that German resistance would simply collapse under the weight of British precision and American resources. But Montgomery was not the only Allied general eyeing the Rhine with hungry ambition. Lieutenant General George S. Patton, Jr., commanding the U.S. Third Army, had been driving his men eastward with relentless fury since the breakout from Normandy. Where Montgomery saw chess, Patton saw blitzkrieg. Where the British Field Marshal planned, the American general attacked. Patton's philosophy was simple, almost primitive in its directness. Keep moving, hit hard, never give the enemy time to breathe. His Third Army had liberated more French territory, captured more German prisoners, and advanced faster than any other Allied formation. And Patton knew it. The rivalry between these 2 men was no secret. It crackled through every staff meeting, simmered beneath every operational directive. Montgomery, aristocratic and precise, viewed Patton as a reckless cowboy. All aggression, no finesse. Patton, in turn, regarded Montgomery as an overly cautious prima donna who confused caution with competence. Their mutual disdain was personal, professional, and utterly toxic to Allied unity. Yet both men were brilliant commanders. Montgomery had won at El Alamein, had orchestrated the D-Day landings. Patton had saved Bastogne, had torn through the German lines with unprecedented speed. The problem wasn't their talent. The problem was their egos. Standing between them, holding the entire Allied command structure together through sheer diplomatic skill, was Dwight D. Eisenhower. Supreme commander of all Allied forces in Europe, Eisenhower possessed neither Montgomery's aristocratic pedigree nor Patton's battlefield flamboyance. What he had instead was something rarer, the ability to manage brilliance without being consumed by it. Eisenhower understood that winning the war required more than tactics and firepower. It required keeping Americans and British working together, balancing national pride with military necessity, and occasionally letting talented subordinates clash while preventing them from destroying each other. By mid-March 1945, the strategic picture seemed clear. Montgomery would cross the Rhine north of the Ruhr, using his carefully orchestrated Operation Plunder. American forces under General Omar Bradley, including Patton's Third Army, would provide support, secure the southern flank, and wait their turn. The crossing was scheduled for March 23rd. Montgomery had requested and received priority for supplies, air support, and Eisenhower's personal attention. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The British would lead the way into Germany's heart. History would remember Montgomery's methodical brilliance. Patton, for once, would have to watch from the sidelines. Except George Patton had never been good at watching, and he had no intention of letting Montgomery claim all the glory of crossing the Rhine. On March 7, 1945, elements of the U.S. First Army stumbled upon an intact bridge at Remagen, a shocking discovery that sent ripples through Allied headquarters. The Ludendorff Bridge, damaged but standing, offered an unexpected gateway across the Rhine. American troops poured across before German engineers could detonate the remaining charges. It was a tactical windfall, though the bridgehead remained relatively contained. Patton watched this development with intense interest. If First Army could cross by accident, Third Army could cross by design. He ordered his staff to begin quiet reconnaissance along the Rhine's southern sectors, probing for weaknesses, identifying crossing sites. Patton wasn't waiting for permission. He was creating opportunities. His intelligence officers located a promising site near the town of Oppenheim, south of Mainz. The river was wide, but the eastern bank showed lighter German defenses. Local German units were depleted, disorganized, stretched thin by months of retreat. Patton saw his moment. He ordered his engineers forward, told his assault battalions to prepare for immediate action, and kept the entire operation under strict secrecy. Not even Bradley, his immediate superior, knew the full extent of Patton's intentions. The general understood something fundamental about modern warfare. Speed trumps preparation, surprise beats firepower, and sometimes the boldest move is simply to go. The night of March 22nd, 1945, was moonless and cold along the Rhine near Oppenheim. At 2,200 hours, assault boats from the 5th Infantry Division slipped quietly into the dark water. No preliminary bombardment, no airstrikes, no warning at all. The first wave paddled across in near total silence, their engines muffled, their movements synchronized. German sentries on the eastern bank noticed nothing until American infantry were already scrambling up the muddy slopes. Within 2 hours, 6 battalions had crossed. By dawn, engineers were ferrying tanks and artillery across on improvised rafts. Patton's operational security had been flawless. Not a single German unit had anticipated the assault. The crossing at Oppenheim cost Third Army fewer than 30 casualties in the initial assault. 30 men, to breach Germany's greatest natural defense. By comparison, Montgomery's elaborate Operation Plunder, launching the following night with massive air and artillery support, would suffer hundreds of casualties despite overwhelming superiority. Patton's method was almost surgical in its efficiency. He had studied the river for weeks, identified the weakest point, concentrated his forces in absolute secrecy, and struck with overwhelming local superiority at the moment of maximum surprise. It was blitzkrieg in reverse. American forces using German tactical doctrine against its creators. When word reached Montgomery's headquarters that Patton had crossed the Rhine, the British Field Marshal's reaction was immediate and volcanic. For months, Montgomery had coordinated Operation Plunder, allocating resources, positioning units, synchronizing air and ground operations. He had specifically requested that other Allied commanders avoid premature crossings that might alert German defenses or dilute the impact of his own assault. And now Patton, that insufferable American showboat, had crossed with virtually no preparation, no coordination, and worst of all, no significant casualties. Montgomery saw it as more than military insubordination. It was personal humiliation. The British press had spent weeks building anticipation for Montgomery's grand crossing, positioning it as the decisive blow that would end the European war. Now those same newspapers would have to report that an American general had beaten him across by a full day. Montgomery fired off a series of increasingly agitated messages to Eisenhower's headquarters. Patton had violated operational security. He had acted without proper authorization. He had endangered the broader strategic plan by alerting German forces prematurely. And beneath all the military terminology, the real message was unmistakable. Patton had made Montgomery look slow, overcautious, and thoroughly upstaged. The Rhine crossing controversy transcended military tactics and entered the realm of international politics. Britain, exhausted after 5 years of total war, needed visible victories to maintain its status as a great power. Montgomery's carefully orchestrated crossing was meant to demonstrate British military prowess on the world stage, proving that the empire still led, still mattered. American newspapers, however, seized on Patton's achievement with nationalistic enthusiasm. Headlines celebrated American audacity, American speed, American success. The narrative practically wrote itself. While the British planned and prepared, Americans acted and conquered. For Churchill's government, already anxious about Britain's diminishing influence relative to America and the Soviet Union, this public relations disaster cut deep. The War Office in London pressured Eisenhower to acknowledge Montgomery's Operation Plunder as the real Rhine crossing, to downplay Patton's achievement as a minor preliminary action. But American public opinion wouldn't allow such revisionism. Patton had become a folk hero, the embodiment of American military swagger. To discipline him now would spark outrage across the United States. Eisenhower found himself managing not just military operations, but the delicate psychology of a coalition slowly fracturing under the weight of competing national egos and the approaching reality of victory. March 22nd, 1945, 2,200 hours. The assault boats of Patton's 5th Infantry Division touched the eastern bank of the Rhine at Oppenheim. Within 6 hours, a full bridgehead had been established. By dawn on March 23rd, engineers were constructing pontoon bridges while tanks and artillery rolled across on rafts. Patton himself arrived at the riverbank that morning, striding to the center of a newly completed pontoon bridge. He stopped mid-span, made a show of urinating into the Rhine, a gesture of pure theatrical contempt, then continued across to inspect his troops on German soil. At 1,000 hours, he placed a call to General Omar Bradley, his immediate superior and longtime friend. Patton's voice crackled with barely contained glee. "Brad, don't tell anyone, but I'm across." Bradley, understanding immediately what this meant for Montgomery's meticulously planned operation launching that very evening, replied with dry humor, "Well, I'll be damned. You mean across the Rhine?" Patton confirmed. Third Army had crossed with minimal casualties, established a secure bridgehead, and was already pushing inland, all before Montgomery's grand assault had even begun. The news reached Eisenhower's headquarters within hours. Staff officers reacted with a mixture of admiration and dread. Patton had achieved a stunning tactical victory, but the political consequences would be explosive. That evening, as Montgomery's Operation Plunder commenced with massive artillery barges and airborne drops, the British commander already knew he'd been beaten to the punch. His assault succeeded magnificently. 2 full armies crossed the Rhine. Paratroopers secured key positions. Bridges went up with mechanical precision. But the headlines had already been written. Patton had crossed first. Patton had done it faster. Patton had done it cheaper. Montgomery's carefully orchestrated symphony had been upstaged by a one-man rock concert, and the field marshal was livid beyond measure. Within 36 hours of Patton's initial crossing, Third Army had not only secured the eastern bank, but had pushed 6 miles inland, capturing thousands of German prisoners and destroying what remained of organized resistance in the sector. It was a masterpiece of operational tempo, the kind of lightning advance that defined modern armored warfare. March 25, 1945. Montgomery's formal complaint arrived at Eisenhower's headquarters in Reims. The telegram was professionally worded but barely concealed its fury. Field Marshal Montgomery formally requested that Lieutenant General Patton be relieved of command. The charges were specific: unauthorized offensive action, violation of operational coordination, reckless disregard for the broader strategic plan, and deliberate undermining of Allied unity. Montgomery argued that Patton's impulsive crossing had alerted German forces to Allied intentions, potentially endangering Operation Plunder. More fundamentally, Montgomery insisted that Patton's behavior represented a pattern of insubordination that could no longer be tolerated. The field marshal demanded a response. He wanted action. He wanted Patton fired, disgraced, and sent back to America before he could cause further damage to Allied cohesion. Eisenhower read the telegram twice, then sat in silence for several minutes. His chief of staff, General Walter Bedell Smith, waited. The room held the weight of decision. Eisenhower understood the dimensions of this crisis. Montgomery was Britain's most celebrated commander, architect of some of the war's most important victories. To dismiss his concerns would risk a rupture in Anglo-American relations at the worst possible moment. Yet Patton, for all his flaws and theatrical arrogance, had just delivered one of the most brilliant operational successes of the entire European campaign. To fire him now would demoralize American forces, inflame public opinion, and remove from the battlefield one of the few Allied generals the Germans genuinely feared. Eisenhower drafted his response personally. The actual words, preserved in historical records, reflect his diplomatic genius. He acknowledged Montgomery's concerns with respect. He praised Operation Plunder's success and Montgomery's operational skill. Then he addressed Patton's crossing directly. Eisenhower noted that while Patton's methods were unorthodox, the results spoke clearly. Third Army had achieved its objectives with minimal losses, had exploited a tactical opportunity with admirable speed, and had contributed significantly to the overall Allied advance into Germany. Eisenhower stated that while he would speak with Patton about coordination and communication, he saw no grounds for relief of command. Patton would remain with Third Army. The advance would continue. The key passage, carefully worded to soften the blow while remaining firm, essentially said this: Montgomery's concerns were noted, but operational success mattered more than bruised feelings. Eisenhower refused to punish victory. He would not fire a general for winning too quickly, too cheaply, or too boldly. The decision was final. Montgomery would have to accept it. And in that moment, with those words, Eisenhower defined the character of Allied command for the final weeks of the European war: pragmatic, results-oriented, and willing to tolerate genius even when it came wrapped in ego and insubordination. The immediate consequences of Eisenhower's decision rippled through Allied command like aftershocks. Patton remained at the head of Third Army, which now exploited its Rhine bridgehead with characteristic aggression. By March 28th, Third Army had pushed 20 miles beyond the river, captured the strategic city of Frankfurt, and was racing eastward toward the heart of Germany. Patton's armored columns moved so fast that German units surrendered in confusion, unable to establish defensive lines before American tanks appeared in their rear. The tactical vindication was complete. Patton's lightning crossing had not endangered Allied operations. It had accelerated them. Montgomery, meanwhile, pressed forward with Operation Plunder's objectives, his forces advancing methodically across a broader front. The operation succeeded in every measurable way. His troops secured their assigned objectives, linked up with American units, and began the systematic reduction of German defenses in the Ruhr Valley. Yet the psychological damage was irreparable. British newspapers, initially prepared to trumpet Montgomery's triumph, found themselves reporting Patton's achievement with grudging admiration while relegating Operation Plunder to secondary coverage. The narrative Montgomery had carefully cultivated, Britain leading the final assault into Germany, had been shattered by an American general who refused to wait his turn. The dynamic between Eisenhower and Montgomery shifted subtly but permanently. The British field marshal had played his strongest card, demanding Patton's removal, and Eisenhower had declined. Montgomery understood what this meant. His influence over strategic decisions, once considerable, had diminished. Eisenhower would consult him, coordinate with him, but would no longer defer to British preferences when American commanders delivered results. The balance of power within the Allied command structure had tipped decisively toward American leadership, not through political maneuvering, but through battlefield success that couldn't be argued away. The strategic consequences unfolded with brutal clarity throughout April 1945. Third Army's rapid exploitation of its Rhine bridgehead allowed American forces to encircle the Ruhr industrial region from the south, while other Allied armies closed from the north. By April 18th, more than 300,000 German soldiers were trapped in what became known as the Ruhr Pocket, the largest encirclement of enemy forces in the entire Western Front campaign. The speed of this envelopment owed directly to Patton's audacious crossing and relentless follow-through. Had Third Army waited for coordinated operations, had Patton been relieved as Montgomery demanded, the German forces might have withdrawn eastward, prolonging resistance by weeks or months. The casualty comparisons told their own story. Patton's initial Rhine crossing at Oppenheim cost fewer than 50 American lives in the first 48 hours. Montgomery's Operation Plunder, despite overwhelming air and artillery support, suffered approximately 3,000 casualties, killed, wounded, and missing, in achieving its objectives. The disparity wasn't a reflection of Montgomery's competence. His operation succeeded brilliantly by any conventional military standard, but it highlighted fundamental differences in operational philosophy. Montgomery's methodical approach minimized risk through overwhelming preparation. Patton's gamble on speed and surprise achieved similar objectives at a fraction of the cost. Neither approach was inherently superior, but in the specific circumstances of March 1945, Patton's method proved devastatingly effective. The media narrative solidified in ways that would shape historical memory for generations. American newspapers celebrated Patton as the embodiment of aggressive American spirit, the general who won through boldness rather than bureaucracy. British publications defended Montgomery's professionalism while quietly acknowledging that the American had stolen the thunder. German commanders, interrogated after the war, admitted that Patton's crossing surprised them completely, while Montgomery's preparations had been obvious for weeks. The psychological impact on German morale was significant. If the Allies could cross the Rhine almost casually, what hope remained for meaningful resistance? The long-term impact on Allied command relationships extended beyond the immediate operational success. Churchill, already concerned about Britain's diminishing role in shaping the post-war world, saw Montgomery's humiliation as symbolic of Britain's fading power. Roosevelt and his military advisors noted that American commanders were now driving the tempo of operations. Stalin, watching from the east as Soviet armies closed on Berlin, recognized that the Western Allies' internal rivalries might be exploited in post-war negotiations. The Rhine crossing controversy became more than a military episode. It became a marker of shifting global power, the moment when American military dominance became undeniable, when British leadership transitioned from partnership to junior partnership, and when coalition warfare revealed the inevitable tensions of competing national interests even in victory. Leadership, in the end, is the art of managing brilliance without extinguishing it. Eisenhower understood what many commanders before and since have failed to grasp. that winning requires more than choosing the best plan or the most talented general. It requires balancing egos against outcomes, national pride against military necessity, and personal grievances against strategic reality. When Montgomery demanded Patton's head, Eisenhower faced a choice that transcended military doctrine. He could preserve Allied unity by sacrificing a difficult subordinate, or he could defend results over relationships and accept the political consequences. He chose the latter. In doing so, Eisenhower demonstrated that coalition warfare demands not just tactical skill, but diplomatic courage, the willingness to disappoint allies in service of larger truths. Patton crossed the Rhine in 36 hours not because he was reckless, but because he understood that in warfare, as in life, timing matters more than perfection. Montgomery's anger was real, his grievances legitimate. But Eisenhower's response spoke a harder truth. Wars are won by generals who deliver, not by generals who complain about those who deliver first. The Rhine would be crossed, Germany would fall, and history would remember not the rivalry, but the results.